Welcome to this network seminar about Europe's role in world mission with myself and with Peter, who will speak next. There is a mood that I recognize very frequently among evangelicals in Europe, at least in the Western and Northern areas. That's the mood of resignation. Many of my generation have either withdrawn because they have become conformed to the patterns of thought and consummation that marks the culture of Europe, or they still walk with the Lord, but not realizing that he who is in us is stronger than the one who is in the world. God never gave up on Europe, and God still calls the followers of Jesus on this continent to follow him across borders globally. May I turn your attention for a moment to something that happened in Europe on this continent 300 years ago. The German Count, Nicholas von Zinzendorf, met a decisive call from Jesus in an art gallery while studying the crucified Christ. It was like a voice saying to him, "This much I have done for you. What will you do for me?" The following years, the growing group of Moravians settled on his estate in Herrnhut, and they formed a community dedicating their lives to pray around the clock for world mission. This prayer meeting lasted continually for about 100 years, from 1727. And during this time, from the groundbreaking sending of William Carey in 1791, Europe's genuine role in world mission was formed, with a growing number of missionaries crossing borders for the gospel. You see, mission is not about human power. We are part of God's mission, and he who is in us is stronger than the one who is in the world. God never gave us a spirit making us timid, but the spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. Hence, it is time to lift our heads and find our redefined role in God's mission. The pattern of world mission has changed dramatically and for the better. It used to be one-way traffic from the West to the rest. The last decades, the number of missionaries has increased almost exponentially because many vital and vibrant younger churches have entered the arena and made mission a multiplex movement to and from all continents. In general, I will say that there are three unchangeable addresses for the gospel that the church always needs to have in mind. We all have a primary responsibility for bringing the witness to our own people, meaning our family, job mates, neighbor, and friends. And that is the issue for this conference or this gathering. How can we re-evangelize our countries in Europe? The second address is the one that Paul calls primary, to go to the Jews first. Reaching the Jewish people with the gospel is not only an issue for Messianic Jews, even though they have formed strong ministry for that purpose. The role of the Jews in God's election and in his salvation history puts them on the fore as an address for the gospel. Too many European churches retreated from sharing the gospel with the Jews after World War II. Considering the anti-Semitism of the church for centuries, this is fully understandable. However, we must distinguish between consideration on the one hand, about how to proceed witnessing in a contextual and sensitive and relevant way, and on the other hand, retreating from sharing the gospel at all. Retreating from witnessing Jesus as Messiah to the Jews might easily become a new sort of anti-Semitism. Why should the people which Jesus belonged to not have the opportunity to share the faith in him as Messiah? If Jesus is not the Messiah of the Jews, he is not the Savior of the world. The third and widest address is the one to the nations. Jesus is very concerned that we take this seriously as he proclaimed, "This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Since 1974, the Lausanne movement has had a sharp focus on the many people groups on the earth without the strong presence of the gospel. We often call them unreached or least reached or even unengaged, depending on the level of missional involvement. In the biblical language, these are not nations in the meaning of states or countries. They are people groups from the Greek word ethnos, today often defined in terms of language, culture, and ethnic distinctiveness. I will spend the rest of my presentation on these global addresses, which I, both from a biblical perspective and from research of the current situation, consider the big issue of world mission. There are different ways of counting numbers of ethno-linguistic groups on Earth. While the Joshua Project counts 17,400 groups, World Christian Database says approximately 13,000. That's a signal that this is not the question of using mathematics for speculations. The question about the number of groups might preferably remain open. However, the numbers that we get give us an overview of the remaining task of world mission. According to Joshua Project, about 40% of the ethno-linguistic groups in the world still are in unreached category, meaning less than 2% Christians. World Christian Database uses a different vocabulary, saying that 2.2 billion people on Earth are unevangelized. Well, conclusion is there is still a vast evangelistic task remaining globally. If you look at the most pressing issues, one stands out as significant. In 2010, one supposed that 86% of all the Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists do not know any follower of Jesus Christ. If there is one big issue in world mission, this is the one. Most of them live in what we have called the 1040 window. However, I wonder if these numbers are realistic also to Europe. How much have we done to reach out to the people of these vast religious groups on our continent, in our countries, in our neighborhoods? Are 80% of them still unreached here with us? And if so, how can we live well with that? Let me give you an illustration. The biggest unreached people group on Earth are the Shaikh group of Bangladesh, often called the Bengali-speaking Muslims. They might be as many as 140 million people, very few knowing and following Jesus. The same ethnic group of Shaikhs in India consists primarily of Hindus, about 80 million of them. India is, by the way, the country in the world with most unreached language groups, more than 2,000. And that's a number far beyond any other country. Touching the European continent, Turks are also on the top list of unreached people groups. How does that engage the churches of Europe? Only 3.3% of the missionaries in the world are sent to unreached people groups, and only 0.1% of the mission funds are going to the unreached. Shouldn't that challenge us deeply? The vast majority of the unreached people groups are without reach of ordinary missionary sending. Fear has a tightening grip on many autocratic leaders of nations. Religious nationalism is growing, and so is hostility towards Christian presence from the West. Between 200 and 300 million Christians experience different levels of persecution. All this must be taken into consideration while thinking strategically about mission to the least reached. It also means that the role of a European in world mission today normally is quite different from how it used to be. However, that does not mean that we should not take our current role. One strategic area that is to the core of mission is alleviation of Bible poverty. We need Bible translators. This is a very time-demanding job, and it takes years to train academically for doing the job properly. With 1.5 billion people still not having a full Bible available in their language, there is still a vast job waiting for Europeans who will use their linguistic and cultural skills for spreading the gospel. Work is currently being done in more than 2,700 languages worldwide, but at least 2,000 languages still need a Bible translation started. If we want to enter the countries where Jesus is very little known today, we normally can't do that on a missionary visa. Still, there are open doors to most of these countries. In the global market, many countries are eager to receive business people and professionals from Europe. It is also possible to send or exchange students between universities in the same countries. These are also open doors then for a competence that we have in our culture. We usually call this ministry tent making. It builds upon a foundation of the marketplace ministry that we are called to in our home cultures and which has the primary focus at this European gathering. In tent making, this same idea is being used for cross-cultural ministries. Once the European Christians realize that there is a God-given calling in and to all honest work that we do, no matter profession, many more on our continent would be encouraged to follow Jesus globally. God is interested in our profession. He has called you to do it, and your work has a great spiritual significance when you find its divine intention. If we could start seeing reality this way, numbers of European Christians would be released to a global ministry that needs our competences today. Our patterns of world mission thinking need to be changed. Once that happens, many more doors will be opened. It is a sort of the old African wisdom. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There have been times, and for some mission initiatives still these times are, when Western missionaries try to make mission a quick fix solution. In serious mission, this was never the case. Mission for the sake of the gospel takes time, and it takes more time with bigger cultural differences. Cross-cultural mission never pays off unless it is interactive and involves people of different cultures. As Europeans in God's mission, we have a lesson to learn. It is a blessing from above that much more than ever today, the whole church, globally spoken, now takes responsibility for taking the whole gospel to the whole world. I'm sure most European Christians would rejoice if they knew about this paradigm shift. Maybe a few would regret that we are not in the leadership role anymore. And of course, we are deeply sorry for the loss of spiritual power in many traditional European churches. However, we are also part of a much bigger team. And even in Europe, we see vibrant churches taking part in the global commissioning of the church, many of them churches with other ethnic backgrounds than the traditional European churches. Are we open to let this inspire, motivate, and fertilize us? In missiology, we tend to say that Christian mission enters a culture as a pioneering work, continues in a parenting role when the church is new and immature, then goes to a partnering role with the church, and hopefully ends up in a lasting relation with partnership directed by the church. I think we should be critical to the parent role, as that's where European mission remained for too long in many relations. From day one of pioneering, we need to aim at partnership and lasting participation. The good news are that this multiplicity of mission between all continents globally are in function. Are we as Europeans able to see the blessings of this and join in as humble partners? For years, we have dreamed and talked about an increased reciprocal partnership for mission between ethnic European and migrant churches in our countries and on our continent. I admit that I have been disappointed at times. After years of talking, why is increased reciprocal partnership so hard to obtain? As a white native Christian, we as white native Christians sure have a long way to go, and a primary responsibility to relate to the new context of our countries. However, there is also a danger of ethnic church ghettos. And this division between churches both obstructs the missional drive and impulse for the established national churches on our continent, and it obstructs many ethnic churches to become relevant missional churches in the European culture. How do we establish a better platform for discussing this and for a totally different collaboration and partnership than we have achieved so far? This is, in my opinion, probably the single most important issue to process strategically for churches intending to be missional in Europe. As for global mission, the European falling curve might be bent in a different direction if we found each other better in mutuality, forming reciprocal strategies and partnership for cross-cultural standing. As native Europeans, we need to be fertilized by the spirit of prayer and testimony that is so fervent with many Christians from the South. So my conclusion is, the three addresses of mission is a standing order to the whole church, always. The Church of Europe still has its share in this calling to cross the different borders with the gospel globally. And the churches of Europe need to listen to the Lord's calling to follow him in God's mission together. Thank you.
We are looking at the subject of Europe's role in world mission. It's a subject that has no easy answers, but answers that have to be reflected on, thought through, and together we can find solutions or answers to some of the questions that we wrestle with in this particular area. As I speak of someone who has come from outside Europe and now living and serving in Europe, I would like to recommend 4 things that I believe can be useful to begin to think about Europe's role in world mission. The first point I would like to bring to you is the point of listening and learning well. God is at work, but God is working in new ways and in new areas. Europe has been very much a leader in world missions for the last 200 years and more. And so it takes a bit of humility to come to a place where Europe can learn from other places and other parts of the world where the gospel has entered and penetrated a little more recently. And the beauty of coming to this global scene of listening and learning together is that through that act of humility, there's a freshness that it brings to see God working in new ways and among new people who initially, as people groups, never embraced the gospel. Of course, as people come to receive Christ, or the gospel goes into new areas where people have different worldviews, it requires new approaches and also new learning styles. And as we work together and collaborate along these themes of serving God in mission together, we can dialogue and find solutions together as we learn to listen to each other and listen well. There are people who are coming to Christ from places where they experience dreams and visions. There are people coming to Christ who have come to believe the Lord Jesus Christ, and they have a better understanding on how the supernatural works. They have a greater confidence in the power of God at work. And so as we come to the table together, sharing in our experiences, we can learn together. And it's sometimes not easy for those who have been in the faith much longer with a richer history to listen to those who are newer. But as we do this well, I believe that Europe will continue to develop a clear path for their role in mission. The second thing I would suggest is practicing hospitality. Europe remains both a highway and a destination for migration. There are many people who are coming to Europe to find a safe place away from hostility, war, persecution, and natural disasters. And as they enter Europe, they are finding themselves side by side with communities of believers. What a great opportunity to see the world now being at our doorstep. The challenge remains, how do we welcome these people well? How do we love them in a way that they begin to understand the gospel of Christ and the love of Jesus Christ? It requires hospitality. Many migrants in Europe are coming from places where they had no access to the gospel. As we think about diaspora missiology, how God works among people on the move, both Christians on the move and people who have no faith and knowledge of Jesus on the move, we can work together to seek to present Christ and create a place where they can come to hear the gospel of Christ and allow the workforce, the harvest force, and the harvest field being in the same location to experience God's grace working through these communities. The third area I would like to suggest is partnering with others. There are two ways in which I would like to address this issue of partnership. First of all, partnership in the local area, in our local communities. And secondly, partnership in places that are distant from us. Europe is so diverse. Every part of Europe has a slightly different context, a different history, a different setup. But it's important that right at our doorsteps, at home, in our cities that are becoming more diverse, more multi-ethnic, and also with more religions coming in, that we begin to think about how we can build cohesive Christian communities that reflect our surrounding. It's so much easier to try to be homogeneous, monoethnic groups worshiping Christ together. It takes more effort to build groups of God's people with different cultural backgrounds and languages serving together and demonstrating the love of Christ. Many of the migrant communities are also younger and so have a potential to provide vigor and resource some of our aging congregations. So as we learn to partner with Christians from other parts of the world, even though sometimes they prefer to be in their own ethnic churches, especially when they're in large numbers, it's time that we learn to work together for God's greater purpose. Secondly, it's partnership more globally. As we think about places in the world that are least reached, where the church has no ability to have a self-sustaining mission planting movement, there is possibility for Europe to play a role still in world missions in these distant places. But we need to be clear, some of these places are places where it's not easy for Europeans to go into, or if they go, they become more vulnerable and more noticeable. And so perhaps the best way is to partner with near-culture people who can go into these areas where there are restrictions. But as we work together, we think of God's greater purpose and God's greater mission. We work in partnership to allow those who have a better way, a better means, perhaps can enter more easily, to be the foot soldiers at the forefront. And many of us in Europe providing the backup support in teaching, in mentoring, in training. It doesn't stop people from Europe going to these places, but also recognizing that it perhaps is more contextually relevant to send other people as we work together. So we are not thinking so much about us going, but who is the best placed person to go into these places. And the fourth area I would suggest is being a resource for mission. Europe has a long heritage in publishing, in being involved in mission, learning lessons of mission. Europe also has made mistakes in mission, especially amongst the colonial countries in Europe. So there's a way in which both in terms of theology and missiology, we can wrestle with some of the big issues of post-colonialism, mission from historic places, but also mission from a place of weakness. We need to grapple with these things and these issues together, learning from one another, from our rich heritage, from our knowledge, but also from our position of wealth. Europe is a wealthy continent. But as we come and work together, there is a strong place for us to seek to see God's transforming power using our rich heritage, our rich knowledge, but also coming to the table to dialogue together so that other voices from other parts of the world can speak into this mission conversation and dialogue in a way that will enrich God's global witness, because they bring aspects of their own journey and experience to the table that can in itself enrich those from Europe, but Europe can also supplement and complement their efforts. So as we think briefly over this topic, I want to remind you that I believe in God's greater purpose, Europe still has a role to play. The issue is that that role has to be discussed together in God's wider body, where mission now is from anywhere to everywhere. Some of the places which were initially mission fields are themselves sending missionaries and workers, and high quality missionaries and workers. Whereas Europe was used to dictating and setting the tone and providing leadership, there is time that we can learn from people from other parts of the world that are also bringing rich experience, deep spiritual experiences with God, but also examples of how to live for Christ in places of great persecution, difficulty, and lack, and still have a great trust and faith in God. Together as we work, Europe with the rest of the world, and especially the majority world, I believe that it's a wonderful time and a wonderful season where we can learn together what it means to serve God. Thank you, and may God bless you as you reflect on these thoughts.